Welcome to Cornell Keynotes. I'm Beth Flynn Ferry, the Executive Director of the Center for Advanced HR Studies at Cornell's ILR School. And I'm thrilled to have JR Keller here with us today as we cover tips for mid-career job seekers. So JR is an Associate Professor of HR Studies at Cornell. His research has focused on talent management and organizational behavior. And of note for today's session, one thing I learned just this morning is that before entering academia, JR was a career counselor. So he'll have some good tips for us there. He's a faculty contributor to CARS and to multiple online programs available through eCornell. And when you check the chat, you'll see some URLs that will bring some things up if you want to check those out for yourself. So welcome to the show, JR.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, good. So we're going to talk about mid-career job searching. And given today's climate and the news headlines we're reading, even this morning, it seems like a particularly relevant issue right now. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, there's no real way to sugarcoat the fact that this is a challenging time to look for jobs. I'll give you some statistics. I know everybody's probably reading the headlines, but in the tech sector alone, there have been 100,000 layoffs just this year, after 150,000 last year, over 200,000. There have been over 200,000 layoffs among public sector employees. Just this week, like in the last couple of days, Target announced that they were cutting 1,800 corporate roles. Amazon and UPS together announced that they might cut up to 48,000 roles. GM, Rivian, Ford announced recent layoffs. And just again, before we sat down, Paramount announced that they were going to lay off up to 2,000 individuals. And I think what's unique about these cuts, other than the fact that one is that they're across almost every industry, but it's often firms cutting out entire teams, business units, refocusing from sectors. And so rather than sort of laying off younger workers and keeping older workers, huge swaths of the workforce are experiencing layoffs. And that means sweeping up more mid-career professionals than ever before.
Okay. Well, that makes it sound especially dire, I think, for these mid-career job searchers. So talk a little bit about what they can do.
As a mid-career job seeker, right? A big part is first thinking, really understanding like where you sit, right, in the market, right? Really understanding that as somebody with professional experience, you actually do have sort of a story to tell and a way to sell your knowledge, skills, and abilities than you ever have before. I think the other thing is just understanding that if you haven't been on the market or looking in a while, is understanding how things have changed, getting a sense for how to approach the sometimes overwhelming number of job postings that are out there, and getting an understanding of the different technologies that sort of underpin how individuals can look for jobs and how companies are evaluating talent.
Okay. And what are the special job challenges or job hunting challenges for folks mid-career, so in their 30s, 40s, 50s?
I think one is that, sort of, and I include me in this list, right? Sort of mid-career, middle-aged individuals, is that we often have less flexibility than younger workers, right? So we might be tied into a community, right? Sort of have settled in, have families or be near families, be taking care of older relatives, certainly have financial commitments, mortgages, maybe college tuitions, really thinking about healthcare in a way that maybe you haven't when you were younger. And so all of those things make it more challenging to find roles that could be a good fit. I think the other thing is, for the past 25 years, except for really small, short-lived pockets in certain pieces of certain industries, like it's been an awesome job market, right? It's been really easy to find roles and to move when people wanted to move. Layoffs have been relatively scarce, right? Or certainly not like the ones we were just talking about. And so it could be the first time that somebody's experiencing a layoff in their career. Could be the first time people are really worried about their job security and are testing the market. Or just the first time you're really actively looking for a new job in sort of a widespread way. And so figuring out, like, it's kind of, I was before, like, where the heck do I start?
Yeah.
And how have things changed is new.
Yep. But mid-career have some advantage too, right? With the story to tell. How would you weave that in?
Yeah, and I really do think that that's an important important aspect, is that, right, as somebody in the middle of your career, right, like, part of what you always want to do is be able to sell why you're a great candidate for a particular role or for a particular company, right? And you may have to be a little bit creative in terms of how you craft that story for different type of roles, and depending on maybe a pivot that you want to make. But you actually have like a whole host of stories and experiences to draw on that other folks may not.
Right, right. Okay. And what practical advice might you have for the audience?
There's so many small things, I think, that are really important. I think probably the number one thing is to talk to as many people as possible, right? And this for a couple of reasons. So one, like, if you're struggling with finding a role, right? It's taking a while to find a role, or you don't know where to start, like, sort of actually just being able to get that anxiety out of your head and being able to talk about it can be really helpful, right? Sort of put you in a better headspace. But I also think that the more you let people know, the more you tap in and build out a network of people that can help and support you find opportunities, or help maybe craft your story in an interesting way and point out different jobs, different roles, different areas where your skills might be a good fit that you might not be able to figure out all on your own. I think another thing is, if you're sitting down and, say, looking at LinkedIn or Indeed and looking at job postings, like, there are 7 million job postings out there right now, right? Which seems unbelievable because it's taking so long for people to find roles, but it can be a little bit overwhelming, and it can be easy to get discouraged and feel lost. And so really spending some time before you start hitting apply and updating your resume, like, what kind of job do I want? Where do I want that to be? What kind of company am I looking for, right? Assuming that you had any choice, you had choice to your dream job, like, kind of what would that look like? And I think for many people that can feel like wasted time because you're not actually hitting apply, right, and getting your resume out there. But it really pays off and makes your job search can make your job search more efficient and more effective, because you're able to tailor, right, your emails, your version of your resume to particular roles. You're sort of in your head preparing for the interviews that you might have, and it helps to keep you motivated because you have a clear goal in mind.
Well, it's good to hear that you're kind of recommending that people do kind of take that minute to reset, think about things before jumping right back in the job market. I think people get nervous about that, but it in the long run could pay off for you.
It definitely pays off.
And so, many of these folks, and might not have been on the job market for years, and things have really changed. Can you talk a little bit more about the current hiring system?
Yeah. So, and let me know if I miss anything, right? Because I know you have experience with this too. So, one is that it is easier than ever for companies to advertise jobs, right, and to get word out about jobs, right? So, LinkedIn alone, is 1.2 billion individuals on LinkedIn.
Crazy.
And so if a company posts a job on LinkedIn, right, all of a sudden that is, right, in theory, it's visible to 1.2 billion people, right, potential candidates. Sort of recruiters, whether in-house recruiters at companies or sort of those at search firms, then have access to all of that information and can sort of proactively identify people as well. So I guess another just thing that has changed more so than ever is that, like, LinkedIn is the absolute center of the recruiting universe, right? 10 years ago, even, that wasn't necessarily the case. And so the importance of having an updated, well-written, detailed LinkedIn profile, more important than ever. It is also easier to apply for jobs than ever. LinkedIn has an easy apply button. Indeed has another button where you just basically click a button, and maybe you have to answer 2 or 3 questions, but it just sends your resume automatically instead of having to go to a company website and fill out the same 15 fields every time that you
Right,
want to apply for, right?
yeah.
Basically copying, pasting your resume. So that's changed. I think the challenge with all of that is that job seekers get overwhelmed by the number of opportunities. And so part of the way to combat that is to just hit apply, 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 apply. Well, on the other end, right, then that means that recruiters are drowning in applications.
Mm-hmm.
And so then they're responding to that by using technology to sort through these applications, but not being super transparent about how they're doing that exactly. And so then, right, job candidates are trying to game those systems in different ways. And it just becomes, in some ways, like individuals using their ChatGPT generated resumes, applying to ChatGPT generated job postings, and it's like bots applying to bots. And we can talk a little more about that system. I think if I can say one more piece, is something that I am appreciative that I never had to go through is that in trying to reach more candidates and gather more information, more and more companies are using video interviews. And that's not like I'm going to set up a Zoom call and have a in-person, like, I want to interview you, Beth. And so we're going to log on to a Zoom call. And we're basically going to have a conversation that we would in person, but just via Zoom. But there are technologies like HireVue and others that I'm sure some people are shaking their fist at as they listen, where you'll get a preset list of questions and they'll ask you to record yourself.
Oh, cool.
And submit those answers. And so I think recognizing that so it doesn't shock you on the first time is another big technological change.
But not talking to a person.
No. So you may be, things are changing a little bit. You may talk now to an avatar.
Yeah.
So not a real person, but an AI generated person. And that's, I think for some people, a little bit creepy, but it's better than the alternative, which is you're actually looking at a little window of yourself, right? Answering these questions.
So navigating the system, so the LinkedIn and the easy apply and the video is going to mean a lot about the algorithms, right? So how do you navigate that stuff?
Oh, there's not a surefire way to do this. And I think it's really, let me just step back for 1 second and note that, I just did a call with a bunch of about 25 members of our Center for Advanced Human Resource Studies who run or are involved in talent acquisition for lots of large companies. And I think it may be worth it to the job seekers out there to know that companies are super frustrated with this process too. They don't like how impersonal it is. They don't like the fact that everything's being looked at through an algorithm, and then in turn they're getting, not totally clear, they're getting really authentic reflections of candidates. And so I think you will see over time more interaction, more interpersonal interaction. Okay. But I do think it's worth noting, like, how do these work, right? So it's really some version of a keyword match, right? So there's a job description which sort of lays out the skills and requirements, so whether that's years of experience or certain programming languages or whatever it might be. And then it's trying to scan your resume or look at your LinkedIn profile and identify, like, are there synonyms to these? Like, are there indications that you're a good match for this particular role? And then, they work a little bit differently, but essentially they're generating a match score, right? And so this individual matches at this percentage, and then it's sort of behind the scenes rank ordering those, filtering out those below a certain threshold, sending the rest of those on to an actual recruiter to look at. And so, how do you beat that algorithm? I think, how do you beat that algorithm and sort of maintain your sanity and do an efficient job search? So, well, maybe I'll say this, is that what most people are doing, right, most job seekers are doing, is they're creating one single resume and then just sending that out to everybody.
Yep.
Another approach is what people are doing is they're taking a job description, uploading it into ChatGPT or whatever sort of Copilot, whatever you might be using, uploading their resume and asking it to basically create a customized resume that matches the job description. I do think that it makes sense to use these technologies to help you craft your resume that's going to speak to the posting. But I will tell you that a recent survey of recruiters, 70% of recruiters said that they can, in a second, identify an AI-generated resume, and even if it makes it through the screening system, they'll reject it and won't pass it on to the hiring manager. And so my suggestion, right, what I've seen to be most effective is, right, you're spending your time thinking about the kind of roles you want. Look at a sample of job postings. So create a base, what I might think of as like a base resume that matches the type of companies and jobs you want to apply for. And then spend, right, again, no more than 10 to 20 minutes sort of customizing that before you hit
For each
send
application.
For each application.
Yeah. Okay.
So again, you can use AI to help you with that, but make sure you read the output before you hit send.
And it sounds like you. Yeah. Okay, and so we've got a couple questions coming in. One is a good one for this. So any suggestions, MS asked this, any suggestions for how to better stand out to recruiters who are drowning in applications? So, and you know, they're asking for any unconventional approaches you might take. Have you seen anything?
Well, I think that my biggest piece of advice here, or I think what works is actually, you know, remember I said, like, don't send a cover letter? So I'm not telling you, like, when I did MS, you don't have to send a cover letter, but actually doing a little bit of research on the job in the company. Like, if you spend 5 to 10 minutes doing that research, that's gonna be more than most candidates do. And then being able to turn that into, whether it's a LinkedIn message or an email that you send to the recruiter or somebody at that company, like, that is actually going to resonate, because it's going to suggest that, you know, recruiters want, you know, I think it's worth noting, right, to this point, is that they want authentic candidates who really want to work for the company. You know, I think oftentimes the perception of job seekers is that companies are trying to weed them out, right? It's all we want to do, is we want to throw as many resumes in the digital garbage can as we can. But if you think about like what the job of a recruiter at a company is, or an executive search firm that's trying to place people, is like, their job is to find really good candidates for the job. So they really do want to find great candidates. And what they want are great candidates, not just for the job, but that fit the company. So they want people who want to work there, and not just people who are spreading their resumes out everywhere. And so again, to the extent that you can express that, that's super valuable. So I hope that was specific enough.
We had another question too that was more about, how do you make your LinkedIn profile stand out?
Oh, that I can give you really good advice on. In fact, I just had my college roommate was an executive at LinkedIn for about a decade until recently, and started his own staffing firm. And he just did a big session on this with all my 250 undergrads. And you should really spend time on your LinkedIn profile. You should, mind if I give a couple pieces of specific advice? So one, in your About Me section or profile, I think it's called an About Me section at the top, you should be really clear about the kind of roles that you want. So like, I am looking for like project manager roles. Like, use the terminology of the jobs you're looking for, because that will stand out to recruiters who are using LinkedIn to find potential candidates and scan them. So using that language, so basically an ask, right? Like, what are you looking for? Be really clear about that. And so spending, you know, about 300 words on that section, super useful. And then you actually want to, if you think about the time you spend putting together a resume, you want to have that level of detail on your major accomplishments and what you were responsible for and what your big wins were in your LinkedIn profile under each of those jobs. So you don't just want it to say financial manager, financial analyst, financial intern, you know, whatever the role might be, and then just have the company and the years. But like, what did you actually do in those roles? Spell that out.
So down to the point of like, generated this much revenue, or, you know, real facts in there.
You want to think of your LinkedIn profile as a living, breathing resume. And so for those of you who aren't, right, searching now, right, if you have a major win at work, you generate a big sale, right, which is increased revenue at your company, or you took on a new project or responsibility, like, don't wait to put that on your LinkedIn profile. Keep that updated on a regular basis.
Okay. I have another question here from JC, and they are looking for pointers on resume submissions when you're 50 years or older. So anything specific for that age group in sending a resume in?
I don't know that there's anything particularly different, right, for different age groups in terms of sort of what you want to have on your resume and how you want to communicate things. One thing that you can do is you could take out your graduation year from school, because that's sort of a reverse way of calculating, right, how old you are. Certainly at larger companies, many companies have experimented with doing that anyway. They take out that information so that age doesn't factor in. You do want to, on your resume, right, you do want to keep that to a manageable length. And so really thinking about sort of what are the key highlights or biggest, most important roles. I think lots of people say you want to keep your resume to 1 page. I think 2 pages is fine.
Yeah.
You can add more detail on your LinkedIn profile.
True.
Right? And so think about that as your expanded version.
Yeah, okay. Another question on here from Sunanda. She wants to know how to build your professional network in the era of AI. Any thoughts there?
It's a great question, Sunanda. I don't know that the era of AI changes the way we think about building a professional network. Because still the idea is you want people to, you want to build genuine connections with people. So I think to the extent that things are different with AI is that you can help AI craft a message to somebody who you haven't met for the first time and sort of identify points of connection that maybe you wouldn't have realized. So it can help sort of make it so that somebody's going to open an invitation on LinkedIn, right? Or open your email or respond to you to sort of have a career conversation. What I think is happening, and I imagine most people are experiencing this, is, there is it's so unclear to figure out who is an authentic candidate, what connections are authentic. I know I've used this word a bunch of times, is that these interpersonal connections and actually having in-person conversations with people, taking the time to do that is going to matter more than ever.
Yeah. And I know you talked earlier about, no need to kind of send a cover letter, which people struggle to write them anyway. So, right?
Yeah.
Good news there. But it might be a way to make those, you apply through LinkedIn or Indeed or whatever, trying to get through the AI algorithm and then, reach out to people to help get that extra push or that extra look through a cover letter type.
Yeah, listen, I have a bunch of executive recruiter friends in my life. Beth, you and I both talk to talent acquisition people all the time through the Center for Advanced Human Resource Studies. And I have never heard a recruiter tell me, or even a hiring manager tell me that they were super upset that a really good candidate reached out to them.
Yeah, right.
Right?
Yeah.
So at worst, they won't respond.
Yeah.
But it's not going to be a negative. At best, what may happen is they don't respond, but it plants your name in their brain, and so they remember to look at your application. So as long as you have something, a point of connection to make in that email, right, and spending time doing that, it can only help. It's not going to hurt.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think people are worried that they're going to annoy a recruiter or a hiring manager by reaching out to them and be like, they're going to be so annoyed that they're not going to want to consider me as a candidate. Take the time to do that.
Yeah, okay. On this LinkedIn profile stuff, another question from Satish. How do you manage your profile when you're looking at multiple roles? So if you're looking at delivery management, account management, program management, so you've got little different branches here, what do you do in your profile to reflect that?
Yeah, I think, so not everybody is going to have one sort of job that they're looking for. So this is not an unusual situation. And I also think it's worth noting that I don't think most hiring managers, if we think of them as sort of the ultimate decision makers, they're aware that people are looking for multiple opportunities and ways to apply their skill. So I think unless you say that I'm looking for an accounting role and a sales role and a mechanical engineering role, things that don't make any sense, that if you have a set of things that you are open to, then that is totally fine to articulate in your sort of about me
So showcasing kind of a variety of skills or, areas that you can leverage those in is a positive.
Yeah, I think here's the test that I would give. The test I would give is if somebody asked you, what's the theme among these 4 roles, 5 titles? If you can explain that in a way, then it's okay to include all of those.
Yeah,
exactly.
Okay. So Armand asked, what are the best alternative ways to find jobs that are not advertised, since many stats show that 70% of jobs are not advertised? Any thoughts? Work your network?
I think work your network. Let people at companies or who are doing jobs that you are interested in, like ping them, like let them know, try to set up sort of coffee chats, Zoom chats, whatever, to let people know that you are interested. I think that I've seen that number float around for a whole bunch of years, that 70% of jobs aren't advertised. And I don't think that that's true. I haven't really seen any like great
it would
evidence.
Be hard to believe. Yeah.
But that I think more and more, for legal reasons and sort of ethical transparency reasons, companies are more likely to post roles.
Yeah.
Now, you may find that there are roles that are posted where sort of a candidate has been pre-identified. But the fact that those are posted and they're still looking, reaching out is useful.
How about, talk a little bit about career counselor. Is it worth it to have one? How do you find one?
Oh, I think finding a good career counselor is, I think, such a great investment. And I think that there's a number of reasons for that. Is one, if you find somebody that you really vibe with and is helpful, then you have sort of a dedicated career therapist.
Yeah.
So you have somebody to bitch and moan to and express your frustrations to. They can also help level set and say, like, you're not alone in this, right? So if it's whether your spouse or your parents or your friends are like, I'm so tired of hearing about this, you have somebody who is interested, right, in hearing about this forever. I think more importantly, a good career counselor can help you do 2 things. So one is that they can really help you tell your story, right? So let's say you've been in your current role or current industry for a really long period of time. Like, you tend to view yourself in a particular way. Like, here's what I'm good at. Here's the kind of jobs that I'm good at. Here's the skills that I have. You don't necessarily think, like, where could those be transferable? What other industries might be interested in me for these reasons? And then if you haven't really had to look for a job in a long time, like, selling yourself may be something that you're uncomfortable with or out of practice. And so they're really great at helping you craft a compelling narrative, right? We talked about the benefit of a mid-career job seeker having a story, but you get an editor, right, to help you figure that out. And that is the most valuable piece. The second most valuable is that if you're looking to make a particular type of transition, right? So like, I have friends who are making academia to industry transitions. Like, doesn't happen all that much, and it's a specific type of way to sell your story. They know how to do that. And also, certain industries may have particular jargon that they use, keywords that the recruiters are looking for, different technologies. And so they really know, and the processes, and they really understand that and can help educate you.
Yeah. And Nathan, your question about individuals who are doing a significant job pivot, I think a career counselor, as you mentioned, could be very helpful in that. Is there any other thoughts?
No, and Nathan, to this piece, like, there are pockets of counselors who are really great at, like, specialize in career pivots more generally, but also that focus on certain types of career pivots. And so you can try to identify those folks who have experience with the kind of move that you want to make.
Okay. And then Tony asked a question back onto the resume stuff, is how do you list accomplishment if your role doesn't really have measurables in it? Like generated revenue. So if you're a communication specialist or trained people at work, I still think there are numbers associated with that. Like if you're training a number of different functions, so you could talk about having sales experience or HR or whatever. You could talk about the numbers of people trained, or maybe the impact it could have on those folks that were trained. Any other thoughts on non-metric related roles?
Yeah, I think. Or listing specific projects, right? Like, I worked on this particular project for this particular type of client, right? because then that opens the door to know that you can sort of work a project all the way through, or that maybe you want to transition into an industry that the type of clients that you've been with are in. And so I think just specificity. So I think specificity is what really matters, more so than measurables.
Okay, that's a good point. Brenda said, what would you say to a professional who prefer to bypass working with a career coach and just use AI?
I'd say that you should go ahead and experiment with this, right? And there are actually sort of AI career coaches that are popping up now too. I haven't really experimented with a ton of those, so I wish I could give you better advice on this. I think what I would do is I would do a couple of things if you wanted to do this. So one is, AI is changing all the time and getting better. I think one thing I would do is make sure that you are asking whatever questions you're asking to multiple different systems, right? Because ChatGPT, and asking it multiple times, because I think one thing we know is that AI will not always give you consistent answers. So part of what you want to do is stress test and make sure you're getting what's consistently good advice that's been out there, right, that you're getting back.
Yeah.
And then maybe you don't want to work with a counselor, but you want to talk with people who are in a particular industry, or your friends or colleagues or former colleagues, to be like, does this make sense? So at least just poke it a little bit for sanity's check. But it can be certainly a cheaper way, right, to help get some guidance. So I wouldn't tell you not to do that.
Yeah.
Just be cautious in your approach.
Yeah. And I think when you're looking internally, so for instance, we have some cars companies that have developed internal career coaches, right? And those AI generated coaches are very specific to the companies. They know the roles, they know the skills and capabilities needed, et cetera, for that, that industry or that company or whatever. And those feel really valuable to me, looking internally. I feel like it might be hard to get one that's more broad-based, kind of external, looking across many industries and many different companies. So I don't have experience with it, but I think your advice there is good. Experiment with it, but maybe don't rely only on that.
Yeah. I mean, I think one way you could do this is imagine you want to make a career pivot from sales into healthcare. Random example. Is that you might look at what are the kind of healthcare roles you are sort of interested in. You could actually then throw these into, I'm just going to say ChatGPT because people know that, into ChatGPT, put your, the resume, the way that you've sort of, just kind of the standard one that you have that's not customized for those roles, and say, can you help me think about how I could identify what skills might be transferable, right? And it's the kind of conversation you would have with a career coach.
Career coach, yeah. Okay, switching gears a little bit, with remote work being increasingly discouraged, how do you think that will impact job seekers?
Well, I'll tell you how I know that it has affected things, as there have been a smaller percentage of jobs that are at least listed online job boards as fully remote. Those jobs get overwhelmed with the vast majority of job applications, right? So again, my friend who used to work at LinkedIn would kill me that I don't remember the exact statistic, but I think what he told me was that over the last year or so, 20% of jobs posted on LinkedIn were remote, and they got 80% of the application activity, right? So a lot of competition for a smaller number of roles for all the reasons you might imagine. I think as we were preparing for this, we were talking about should you want to be a remote or hybrid, and the job either doesn't say it's remote or hybrid, or it says it's in person, should you apply? So I think, the recruiters that we talk with at some companies would discourage the advice I'm going to give you. But I would encourage you, if you find a job, you really want to be a remote or hybrid, but you find a job that is in person that you could conceivably go to, right? The commute might not be what you want exactly, or you might not want to be in the office, but you could make it work. I would apply to that job, because you will ideally sail through sort of the screening process. You get a chance to actually talk with the hiring manager. And I think you have three possible outcomes. One is that they love you. This job is fully in person, and that is never going to change. but then you've at least got an offer for a job that you think you're a great fit for. Alternatively, they say that it's in person, you go to work and you are awesome at your job, and then 2, 3, maybe 6 months in, you now have a relationship with the manager, you've demonstrated you can do the job, and then all of a sudden you can have a negotiation about how often do I really need to be here?
Right.
They're gonna be more likely to customize that job.
Definitely.
And I think in the best case scenario is you are the only great candidate for that role, and you say, listen, I know this is in person, is there any chance it could be remote or hybrid? And if they've spent all that energy in finding you and wanna hire you, that they're open to having that discussion.
Okay. And LaShonda's question came in earlier, relates to this a little bit. Can you speak to being interviewed but not getting to the offer stage? And I wonder if she's asking more about, do I take extra steps? You know, I've been interviewed, but I haven't gotten an offer. So between those two stages, what have you seen or would you recommend?
I don't know if I have a great answer to this particular question, LaShawn. It's a great one. You know, like, is there a way to sort of push your candidacy forward? You know, I think certainly, you know, it is always useful to take the time to follow up an interview with a thank you note to whoever, like if it's multiple people or an individual, which I think is just that added reminder that you're a candidate who really wants this job. Not a lot of people do that, and so doing that can help you stand out. I think certainly if you haven't heard back from a certain period of time, you know, part of this is the nature of these applicant tracking systems is that unless a recruiter hits close, you might not actually hear you didn't get the job until months later, which just sucks as a job seeker and is not the best way to handle that, but it happens all the time. You know, unfortunately, recruiters are really reluctant, or managers, to give feedback to candidates who don't ultimately get that role. You can certainly ask for that, but most won't. I think they're often overly concerned of the legal implications for this, and so they're worried they're going to get sued, even if there's sort of no reality in the fact that, you know, often that wouldn't happen, and so they just won't give you feedback. And so I think part of what you can do is, you know, there are lots of different tools which will allow you to do practice or AI generated or virtual reality interviews, where you can then plug those into an AI and get feedback, or have a friend or family member give you feedback so you can at least practice.
Yeah, but I do think following up is good. I mean, our companies would not want to leave people hanging, I don't think. I think a good company with a good culture, you know, that's a miss. And so maybe they've missed that on you, and so reaching out is okay to do.
Again, like it's never going to be a negative, right? Unless you're like just a total jerk. Like, you know, your email's not going to say, this is LaShonda, you forgot about me, right? Like, as long as you're not doing that, right, and sending a nice, thoughtful email, that will always be a positive, never a negative.
So Stacy just wrote in here, do you have any tips for applying to and interviewing for a step-up job, say from director to executive director, when you're looking outside of your current organization? So looking for that promotion, going in, you know, from your company to another company, but looking for a promotion.
You know, I think in terms of you know, there's sort of, I guess, 3 buckets of ways to approach this. So one is, I think, noting, right, sort of in your LinkedIn profile, like, I'm looking for, right, a senior director role, right? You're currently a director, you want to be a senior director. So noting that you're looking for these higher level jobs, so that ideally the recruiters that are actively looking and find you are not just asking you to do the same job at another company. So signaling is really useful. You know, there's this old adage that I'm sure lots of people have heard, is that you have to do the job before you get the job, right? That even in companies, they kind of want you to be doing the senior director role as a director to prove that you can do it. And so I think to the extent that you can customize, right, your resume or LinkedIn profile to identify, like, I've kind of done these pieces of the job, even if not all of them. So like maybe you supervised people, make sure you note those things. But I think this is also where sort of in your about me, you could say, I'm ready for this step because, and I think where that's really going to come up and where you can really sell that and have to think about it is in the interview, right? And I think it's really useful to note that, like, this is a barrier that you have to convince people that if you haven't done this job, you're ready for the next one. And so don't wait for somebody to ask you that question. Be able to say, like, here's what I've done. I'm ready for this because.
Yeah. The other thing I'd say is that from organization to organization, the titles aren't necessarily the same. And so really be conscious of, the job content more than the title, because that title, you may be looking for a compensation increase and that company may have that at that title kind of thing. So just be open-minded about that, I think.
Great point.
Yeah. So if you're laid off in your mid-50s or beyond, JR, how do you decide if it's time to retire?
Well, I guess the first question to ask is, can you afford to retire? Right. I will be in my mid-50s sooner than I would like to let everybody here know. And I'm still going to have my youngest child midway through school, so I'm not going anywhere. So all joking aside, beyond the financial piece, it's really, I think, important to step back and think about, what do you get out of your job besides the paycheck? Mm-hmm. And this is what we see with individuals who retire and are sort of unhappy in retirement, is that they underestimate two things. The amount of social interaction they get at work and how much that really fulfills them.
Yeah.
So just the small conversations that you have every day. And so think about how important that is to you and whether you can replace that somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And then I think the other piece is just the intellectual stimulation. Right? So having deadlines and challenges and conversations and like having to kind of think through those things. Like, are you gonna, if you like that part of work, can you get that somewhere else? And if not, you might think about alternatives. Like, can I kind of consult on the side a little bit? Like, are there different ways that you could get that?
Yeah. Okay. And Megan asked this earlier, back to career coaching. How should she expect to pay for a career coach, and are they the same as a resume coach? I would say they're not the same, probably.
Yeah, I think they're not the same. There's such variation in
pricing.
Yeah. I think you're gonna, I think pricing tends to occur in two different ways. Now, there may be other models out there, so if I don't cover these and you've seen these, this is my caveat, is that I haven't extensively studied, but there's sort of a per hour fee, right? So it might be anywhere from $100 to $300 an hour that somebody charges. Some might be a little more, some might be a little bit less. But then there's also sort of like a service fee, right? So it might be like, you're going to pay me, let's just say $1,000, just to make it an even number, like $1,000, and that is going to include 3 versions of customizing your resume, 4 one-on-one conversations where we check in on how you're doing, maybe giving you a template for job search tracking, but like a set of services. And so I think it's whatever one of those you'd be comfortable with.
And I'm sure, meeting with a career coach, finding the right fit, and then talking about the different options, including what your budget is, for that type of thing. So Jack asked, what's the current best practice for handling work gap questions in the current environment?
Well, this question, the reason I said is that, it should be that you don't have to answer those questions, right? Because there are all sorts of, you got laid off from a role, right? Because there were widespread layoffs, or you had a sick family member, or you were taking care of, there's so many things, and so many people have work gaps that you would think at this point in time, you don't have to answer those questions. But you should be prepared to answer them, because recruiters won't ask as much, but sort of final stage hiring managers might ask. And so, I think being as authentic you can be is really useful. I think what you want to think of, if you've had a longer gap, right, and it's like a recent gap, what I would encourage you to do is think about, and you're guessing a little bit, but what's the worry, right? What sort of objection do I have to overcome as a job seeker? Is it, I don't have the technological skills, right? You haven't been a full-time employee for the last 5 years. So do you even know what AI is, right? And so be like, here's the reason that I haven't been doing this, but here's what I've been doing in the meantime, right? And so essentially you want to sort of proactively try to address
Right.
whatever objections might be.
And I think for the mid-career folks where, where we're used to seeing, nobody wanted a gap, it's much more common these days. Your early career folks are probably going to have gaps from gig work to they would just want to travel. And so, I think that landscape is changing a little bit, and probably you need to think about it in the context of the organization you're applying to, what the culture is like there, and things like that. So, okay, JR, I'm going to ask you my last question, and then for our audience, if there are any other last questions, you might want to get those in the chat now. But think about this from the other side, the job hunting from the other side. What's that process look like, and from the people doing the hiring side?
Yeah, I think to reiterate a little bit of what I talked about before is that the individuals on the hiring side, like they really want to find good candidates. So when I talk to recruiters about this and sort of like do executive education for talent acquisition professionals, I talk about this in two terms that we sort of use in the academic literature. Is there is an exclusive approach to finding candidates and an inclusive approach. And an exclusive approach, it doesn't mean like exclusive, like, oh, it's so great, like we're looking for the top. It means that like what happens is we get a bunch of resumes coming in, and our main role is to weed out people that we don't like, right? An inclusive approach is saying what we really want to do is we want to be as inclusive as possible because we really are looking for the best candidates. And I think it's important to note that in the mind of most recruiters, like they have an inclusive approach. Like they are desperately trying to find the right people for the job that they are responsible for finding good candidates for. And to the extent that they are using these technologies, whether it's the video interviews or the applicant tracking system, sort of keyword piece, the intent behind those is to eliminate people who literally have no job, no reason to be in here. Like you're applying for a job to be a nurse at a hospital and you don't have a bachelor's degree or have no nursing experience, right? To get rid of those applications. And so I think in that mindset that recruiters want to find you and want to hire you, I think is to me the biggest thing to keep in mind as a job seeker. That's how organizations are thinking about
positive mindset to it, right?
Yeah.
From the applicant standpoint. So a couple last questions came in. Nilofar asked, so when you're looking at a step-up role, how do you update LinkedIn without letting your current employer know?
Oh, okay. So this is a really good question. So two things on this is, if you haven't seen this, as you go onto LinkedIn, you can see this hashtag open to work on a profile. So recruiters, so this is really important to know. So let's just say that we both do work at Cornell, right? But like I'm a recruiter at Cornell, you work at Cornell, you're looking for a job to run another HR center, right? Somewhere else, and you maybe don't want me to know. So if I'm a recruiter at Cornell, I can see my internal employees, but I cannot see if you are open to work, right? So when I look, like that is invisible to me, even when I just log on to LinkedIn Regular. So if I'm tagged on recruiter,
I did not know that.
Yes, and so that's meant, right? That's a protection because LinkedIn, right? Think about the whole power of LinkedIn is that if people don't log on to LinkedIn, update their profiles, then it's worthless as a recruiting tool.
Right.
And so they really have to protect members' best interest. And so you can have that open to work and folks are not able to see that. This doesn't mean like nobody can discover that piece. And I think that I think we overestimate how often people are really sort of checking up on this stuff anyway. And I think that what company, and I think part of what companies have told people, like you are in charge of your career. And so they should expect, right? And I think many do, right? Expect that people are at least open to opportunities.
And it depends on your personal situation and your company. Maybe it's not so bad that they see that. If you're a good employee and are open to remaining with your current employer, it might end up being a positive. But it depends totally on your situation and your company culture. And the last question here from AC, any advice for prepping for interviews outside of the STAR method?
Okay, so the STAR method, right? The situation, task, action, result. It's basically giving, right?
Yeah,
Okay, I
yeah.
remember this from my
Yes.
career counseling
Yeah.
days. Is giving like basically a concrete example to tell me about a time when. So that is great, and you should know that method. Again, I think that the biggest, the best way to stand out as a candidate in an interview is to be able to articulate why you think you are a good fit for that job. So why do I want to work at this company and in this job? And how do I think that I can add value? If you can like articulate that in the absence of anybody asking a particular question around this, like you will stand out. And so that is the thing that I would spend even more time on than the STAR question.
Yeah.
Why me?
Yeah. And I think the other thing is do your homework, right? And have your own questions ready. Don't phone it in. You're going to want them to do their homework on you, and they're going to want to make sure you're very interested in them as well. So, well, great. Well, JR, thank you for the insights. I'm sure our audience found them very valuable. As I think about this, there are three things I take away from it. One is that, there are widespread layoffs these days. They are hitting mid-career professionals pretty hard across many industries and sectors, not just junior roles. So our mid-career people are unexpectedly on the market. So that's where we're at. Second, the hiring systems have really changed, and so the much more modern ones really demand a strategy as you're thinking about looking for a job. So as JR mentioned, the applicant tracking systems, filter resumes by keywords. You really need to tailor your resume to match some of these, and your LinkedIn profile for each job is essential. So AI tools, as we mentioned, can really help, but you've got to review them. You've got to take a look because recruiters sniff that out very quickly, and so you want to make sure even as you use those, they're pretty personalized. And then the third thing is, the networking and mindset really can make the ultimate difference. Talk to people, use your connections, work with career counselors. This can all give you an edge. And so while we encourage you to take time to regroup if you lose your job, recruiters really want people who are active and actively seeking roles and go the extra mile to get those. So we appreciate you all for joining us for today's keynote. If you'd like to learn more about CARS, the Center for Advanced HR Studies, we'll put the URL in the chat. Otherwise, have a great rest of your day.